The book is called Every Man's Dream. The main characters is a black man and his wife, and they're 64 years old. I'm actually kind of amazed that the story of Robert Smalls has not hit the big screen or some TV special.
Welcome to Pages of Purpose. I'm your host, Isaac Smith. Today we are going to meet William West, author of his novel Every Man's Dream. West's book invites readers to explore a compelling narrative that transcends racial boundaries and delves into the complexities of success in a racially divided society. The story unfolds through the unique perspective of a young white reporter tasked with uncovering the remarkable journey of two exceptional individuals, a black man who defies the odds to excel in the face of racism, and a 64-year-old woman who has witnessed the tides of change. William himself is a technical writer with a background as a comedian and a love of history. In this interview, he shares the lifelong process that has been the development of this book and how he was able to write a novel around what could have been if history had played out just a little bit different. Be sure you subscribe to the show so you never miss a new episode. And with that, let's go to the interview. William, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for making time. Real quick, go ahead and just tell us who you are and a little bit about your book.
Well, okay, my name is William West. I am my educational background was in engineering, but I actually worked in human resources for many years. I think the talent I had from a career standpoint is I studied a lot of processes. I taught people how to improve their processes, developed the knack for putting a lot of puzzles together in not just mechanical, but, mental puzzles together. And I think that's how this book came together. I've always been a big reader of a lot of historical stories and just started putting different stories together. I just came across stories that I really liked, and I made notes of them, and I just started finding out that certain stories kind of interwound together. People started knowing each other. People were from one history moment met again in a different history moment, and I just kind of put a puzzle together, and that's how my book developed. The book is called Every Man's Dream. The main characters is a black man and his wife, and they're 64 years old. They actually met in the Civil War. The characters actually, the main character, the man, did exist. He was the son of a famous Civil War hero by the name of Robert Smalls. Unfortunately, the son died at a young age. My novel makes the assumption that he lived a fruitful life. And along the way, him and his wife met a lot of historical characters. It has a lot of Forrest Gump type of thought process to it, where he interacts with a lot of historical characters throughout the novel. There's another theme to the novel. It's kind of a reverse Driving Miss Daisy type of thing, because a young white reporter wants to know how this man got to the level of responsibility that he did. And he's kind of busy with his assignments, so he allows his wife to narrate the story. So throughout the novel, this young white reporter is escorting this older black lady around while she narrates the backstory about their historical rise to wherever they achieved. I also intertwine a lot of comedy into it, even though it is a historical novel. One of my downfalls is maybe I wasn't the best at communicating. So, I took a lot of communication courses, and, I actually did stand up comedy. And I actually professionally, even though I didn't make a lot of money, pocket change, I actually did stand up comedy. So I interwoven some stand up comedy into the book, scenes of like meeting Groucho Marx or, other famous comedians of of the certain era. So, and that's where the book is. So the book traces from the Civil War to the right before America's entry into World War One, which is 1915. It's called Every Man's Dream because what I kind of wanted to achieve in the novel was uh, to showcase how a man of color can rise above the occasion and rise above, the handicaps that he had at the time to become a very important person. And to showcase that every man with a dream can also achieve that level of importance.
Well, one of the questions that I had pertained to Robert Smalls. It seems like there's all this history that's available to the world, whether you look at just the US or you look at any other country in any other point in time. What drew you to Robert Smalls and then isolating this son that died at such a young age and turning that into a big story? Tell me the story behind that.
I'm actually kind of amazed that the story of Robert Smalls has not hit either the big screen or some TV special, because he was a very significant, very special person. I mean, even after the Civil War, he became a congressman and a U.S. senator from the state of South Carolina, of all states, a southern state, even though he stole a ship from the Confederates and literally gave it to the Yankees. He ended up becoming, a successful politician down in South Carolina. Now, I've had people that have read the book and did not understand the story behind that of reconstruction of the South, that certain people that fought for the Confederacy did not have the rights that they had before that. So there was, opportunity there, for, certain Black people and, certain people that, favored the Reconstruction and the justices that were served. I guess in a nutshell, I'm kind of surprised that this story has not been, told universally before. Now, as far as his son, it was just more by accident where, like I said, I put together different stories and then I realized, what if his son really lived, more than just beyond childhood? What would have became of him? If his father rose to this kind of, thing, why not him? That's pretty much explains the father and why the story really has not been told already.
Well, tell me about the main character. What kind of man in your story does Robert Smalls Jr. turn out to be?
Well, it's kind of unique because after they stole the ship, they were given an audience in front of President Lincoln, and there was other famous people there. And one of the people was a captain, might have been a major, but it was George Custer. And George Custer was just joking with him, and he was George Custer, and this is actually true. He was there at that audience with Robert Smalls, with President Lincoln, because he was like an assistant to McCulloch, who was, in charge of the Union Army at the time. And so jokingly, he told the young 9-year-old Robert Smalls Jr., if he ever wanted to give up the Navy and become, join the Army, to, look him up. Throughout the novel, Robert Smalls Jr., how he kind of goes through life, really becomes a captain of the Navy at 9 years old. He eventually does join Custer and is in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. A lot of people don't know this, but there was a battalion at the Battle of the Little Bighorn that actually survived. Not every one of Custer's men got killed. There was a battalion that hid out in the woods, and they fought against a different Indian leader, not Sitting Bull, but a leader by the name of Chief Gall. After the Battle of the Bighorn, and my character Robert Smalls Jr. ends up moving back east, becomes friends with another future president, Teddy Roosevelt. So through Teddy Roosevelt, he gets to fight in the Spanish-American War and becomes the captain of the Marines. And eventually, he becomes a police captain. And that's a very interesting story, too, because it brings in, the mafia of the late 1890s. But he will also eventually become a captain of what would be the future Air Force. It's called the Army Air Corps in 1915. So he kind of ends up becoming a know-it-all of several military, operations, and that's how he gets his. Come 1915, that's how Woodrow Wilson, recognizes his importance as getting our military up to speed for World War I, because our military was very unprepared for World War I. So that's, he becomes a military person, whether he wants to be or not. It's just how he kind of maneuvered through life.
Kind of a captain of all trades or of all branches by the end of his career.
That's right. That's right.
You bring in so many different links from historical people to events. What does it take to write a book like this? Because you're going across a very wide scope. There has to be a lot of research that goes into dictating history in a novel.
I don't think that was my original intent, was to write a novel. Believe it or not, I actually started this thing way back in the year probably 2004, 20 years ago. And it wasn't my intention, I'm going to write a novel. It's just, I came upon a certain story and I said, I really like this story. I'm going to take some notes on it, and I just started writing some notes on it, and that was the story of Robert Smalls. And then all of a sudden I come across, another story, like Doc Holliday. But a lot of people don't realize, he was actually a Southerner, and he was the same age as my character, Robert Smalls Jr., and they met. You got to remember, the elder Robert Smalls was a congressman, and they met at a Southern wedding of Robert Smalls Jr., and Doc Holliday showed him how to shoot a pistol. At the time, Doc Holliday was a dentist down there in the South, and they meet up later on too. Later on in the novel, but I read some origin, some stories of Doc Holliday, and it's like, wow, a lot of people don't realize why he was called Doc. He really was a doc. So, certain stories like that. Another interesting tidbit along with Doc Holliday um, is the story with Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday in Dodge City. I always loved the movie. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's an old Bob Hope movie, but I always loved the movie Eddie Foy and the Seven Little Foys. And it's a great movie. It's based on a famous entertainer by the name of Eddie Foy. And now Eddie Foy got his start in the entertainment business in Dodge City. He used to play poker with Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. Very true story.
Wow.
And I read about that. I said, wow. And I said, this is great too. And then all of a sudden I said, now the pieces are really starting to come together, because I said, my character met this character here, he met this character in the future, and yada, yada, yada. And so, and that's how that worked out there, Yeah, I just kept reading stories about famous people, and not just what made them famous, like Doc Holliday, the OK Corral. That's what everyone remembers. But what made these people, their early years? What is it that people did not realize in the early years? Like there's a great scene with Groucho Marx. He's like 24 years old, just starting out in show business, and he gets pulled up on stage by Houdini, a true story, and he one-ups Houdini. Houdini was so taken back. Houdini could barely finish the show, because Groucho Marx, basically one-upped them, and all this stuff, I just started saying, hey, just pull this into the story. I mean, it all kind of matches. So that's how that worked. And yeah, it's just a matter of just pulling stories together and putting the pieces together. So.
Well, one other character I wanted to ask you about was Adelaide. Am I saying that right? Adeline?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about Adeline because I noticed, like you mentioned already, a lot of the stories told from her perspective. And I was wondering if that was because it was easier to tell the story that way, or if it was because this was part of the character development for who Robert was in his life.
I'm trying to think of the progression that it took, why I decided that. I just think it was it became more of a natural flow. Someone telling the story about himself, would have that same connection. I think having the story told through someone else's eyes, and especially how they met. I mean, they literally knew each other since they were children. So how did she feel about him as a child? How did she feel about him all the way through her life? How she saw some of his weaknesses, and some of his strengths. I mean, it wasn't all in a glimmering light. Their travels where everything wasn't all perfect, where they did have their squabbles and differences, so I think it just made sense that it should be told from someone else's eyes, and she was just a natural selection. I can't think of who else could have possibly have done that. So.
Well, you mentioned earlier you didn't set out to write a book, or you didn't set out to write a novel. At what point did you decide to get this down on paper and get this out to public access? At what point did you decide that this needed to be a book?
I think we're actually approaching the year 2010. I mean, still a long ways away from 2024, 2025. Things really start to come together. And I mean, I did have some writing ability. I published a lot of technical writing. I actually taught people how to improve their technical processes and that kind of stuff. And I actually put this book on the back burner. I mean, I got to a point where I wasn't even looking at it for several years, and then I'd come back to it and I'd write a little more, and whatever. And then when I turned 70, I just said, it's kind of now or never. I said, let's find a way to fill in gaps, and really, that's when I sought help to try to polish it, which in some ways probably lit even more of a fire for me. I didn't just turn it over to someone and say, hey, finish it. I turned it over to someone to help me finish it, but it also at the same time, kind of lit that match under me to actually, say, hey, come on, put your 2 cents in it and try to embellish this a little bit, so, yeah.
Well, let's dig into your background a little bit. We've had some people come on the podcast who writing is in their background, but it's not for being an author. It's for technical writing. It's for maybe education or whatever have you. It's not something that you find in Barnes and Nobles. Do skills like that translate over to becoming an author for a book like this?
Yes and no. I think because I did work in human resources, I think it helped me. I mean, I still publish technical stuff, but I did have a human factor into it. And I think that helped. I think if you're just doing technical publications by themselves, I would have to say no. But because I was I would call myself more of a hybrid. I wasn't what you'd call a true engineer. I worked in human resources, but I was doing engineering technical work. And because I had that human interaction, I would say yes. That's what really helped and really turned the corner.
What does it take to write good comedy that's worth being in your book?
What I found is you have to, even if you have a dire situation, you have to find a way to somehow make some fun out of it. I mean, as bad as the LA fires are, and I assume that they're terrible, there's probably someone out there that can successfully make a joke out of it. We even saw that on 9/11, where Saturday Night Live, as sad as it was, Saturday Night Live could make something seem funny. As tragic as it is. I mean, I didn't really have any tragic moments when I was studying comedy. The only tragic moments would be me trying to do stand-up comedy to a group of Marquette students at 12 o'clock at night, where you're just background music. That's about as tragic as I could ever get. I mean, I'm sure there's times it can be very inappropriate, but that's one thing that I learned, from my, comedy instructor, is, you take something that could be interpreted, as bad, and you try to make it, lively, try to make it funny.
I appreciate that answer, because we haven't had anyone come on the show to talk about the importance of comedic relief in writing a story. And a lot of people that I know who are getting new into writing in general, they panic. Is this going to be funny? Is this going to be taken in the right light? And it's just nice to hear the perspective of someone who has actually made it a point to include that in their book. So I appreciate the insight.
I think one of the advantages I had writing this book is, I had some, famous people. I actually took actual, comedic quotes from them, like Jimmy Durante. So I had the luxury, of basically stealing his material and putting it in the book because, he was a character in my book, so him, people like Groucho Marx and stuff like that, I could actually grab from their material that was already there. So that part of it became a little easy, so yeah. So
Let's talk about the target audience for a second. Who did you write this book for? Who did you have in mind?
I wanted people that don't think that they have a chance in life, because of race or whatever. I wanted them to feel that, yes, they do have a chance. They can rise above certain things and, be the best person that they can be the dream that you want to be, and that's why I put that title in Every Man's Dream, because I want it to be, not just a dream for someone, you know that has all the winds to his back, but I wanted it to be a dream for anyone that has the winds to his face, so.
One of the questions I like to ask authors who are writing a novel or writing a piece of fiction is Robert Smalls Jr. someone who is real in your mind? Does he take on a persona or influence your life in any way now that you've fleshed him out as a character?
In my mind, everything on this really did happen, and I don't see why it couldn't have happened. As far as the persona of me myself, I would probably have to say no. Now, I live in the Milwaukee area, and I've worked my whole life in the Milwaukee area. And now Milwaukee is not a racist city, but it is a segregated city.
Hmm.
Through my work, and I didn't always work in human resources, but different venues. I have interacted with a lot of Black people. I like to think that they probably had some influence in my character. If some of the people that I knew that have read my book, or if they read my book, I would like to think that they would embellish that persona in themselves.
If you had an opportunity and say it was one of those greater than life situations where you were to sit down at a table with this character, what would you want to ask him about?
Well, there's I don't want to give away the ending, but I would ask him, why did you do that? But yeah, I won't ask that. I won't. That would give away that particular ending. But yeah, and there's a couple of scenes in there. Like here's another true story. Chief Gall, which is another Indian chief that, I mean, everyone knows of Sitting Bull, but no one ever knows of Chief Gall, who was a real chief. And when he was battling the soldiers that hid out in the woods, they took cover in the woods, and he paraded himself right in front the soldiers, and the bullets were just going right past them. And in my book, my character Robert Smalls Jr. walks out from the woods and starts, headed to the chief, shooting at him, before all of a sudden he realized he's in danger. So I would ask him, why would you take chances like that? Why would you do that? Why would you, So yeah, throughout my novel, and if you do read the ending, he does take another big chance. I guess, maybe that would be the question I would ask, why would you take all those chances? I can't see taking those kind of chances in life, Why would you take those chances? But so maybe that would be a question I would ask them. So,
Excellent. What advice do you have for other authors who maybe they've been sitting on a story for 20 years or less time or more time, and they're debating whether or not they want to finish, whether or not they want to get it down and get it actually in a book for other people to consume? What advice do you have to anyone debating writing a book?
I would have to say, don't take as much time as I did. I kind of thought that, I took way too much time. Like I said, it took me 20 years. Find a way to make it work, and just keep working at it, and just don't let it go a long way.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing that. Well, William, thank you so much for making time to come on the podcast. Go ahead and pull it up for us one more time and let us see it on the camera. And tell us where we can find it.
Okay. So yeah, it's on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble. I do have a website. You can at least buy the ebook there and the audio book, I believe. I'm not sure yet as far as the paper or the hardback there, but yes, any one of those sites should be fine. So
excellent, and we'll have links to all that down in the show notes below. Thank you for coming on the show.
Okay, thank you.
If you would like a copy of Every Man's Dream, you can find it on Amazon or by following the link in the show notes below. If you're new to the show, be sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode, and be sure that you leave us a 5-star review. With that, we will see you next time.